So we were talking a little bit about, you were just getting into the Dogon before the last break, and lots of people have heard about the Dogon. Some people know about the Dogon. What were you about to say about them? They're absolutely fascinating, and I know you've got them in this book.
Well, so obviously this is the story of the pale fox and some early to mid 20th century French anthropological research in Africa amongst the Dogon, and it's one of those things that just kind of sticks out as being odd because they came back with, oh well, Sirius is not just a twin star system, which is difficult to tell with, well, it's impossible to tell with the naked eye, but also that there's a third smaller one which actually has is in fact the heaviest.
Well, perhaps we may want to back up because I don't know if everyone knows the complete story of why the Dogon are important. And I'll just start by saying they are a tribe in Mali, I believe, in Western Africa, that were very remote. For a very, very long time, were studied by, I know, Mircea Eliade. I have one of his old books. French anthropologists studied them in the 1940s, 1950s, I think. And I think there were others as well, but essentially they came back with this cosmology that the Dogons related to them about their civilization coming from beings who arrived from a particular star, and the star was Sirius B. They said that there's an invisible star around that star, Sirius, and at the time, of course, no one knew that there was a Sirius B. They said this is an invisible star, and they had other things to say about it, which when were discovered in the 1970s, caused a bit of a stir about the Dogon. So the question was, did they get this information via the ancient aliens route, or was it just a lucky guess, or were they polluted by the modern Europeans coming in and somehow giving them ideas that they shouldn't have had, that type of thing?
Yeah, the common dismissal is that somehow Giraud in particular infected them with the mid-20th century understanding of Sirius as a sort of twin star system. But the thing is, they got the masses correct as well. And also, as we mentioned before, like, he is one of the grandfathers of French anthropology. Like, everything else he does can't be touched, but somehow he got this wrong, which is surprising. But the other part of it it's a very good example of that redundant information that I was talking about. Because again, the kind of story that the Dogon have of these beings teaching them various things, and this is important for the starships thesis. They're kind of aquatic. They're sort of half fish beings, and they're associated with Sirius. That's where they live. That's what happens. And this is the story he comes back with. Now, if that was simply a case of in cross-contamination in an anthropological environment, then, as Robert Temple, who wrote the Sirius Mystery in the 70s, and also updated it in the 90s, which is the better version because it has a very long introduction where he mentions how the CIA stole his only copy of The Pale Fox in the 1970s from London, which is where he was living at the time. Now, why would they do that? The Pale Fox, by the way, is the document that describes the French anthropological encounter with the Dogon. So the first information of the Dogon and Sirius and so on. So if that's a case of cross-contamination, it seems a bit too much work for the CIA to jump the pond and steal his only copy.
His one manuscript,
of a book. Yeah, you go, well, that's interesting. So there are all these extra pieces that make you realize there is something else going on there. But crucially, it's the redundant complexity in the information that I find very compelling, because it's not just the accurate and pointless astronomical data that for a West African tribe. It's also that when you look at the depictions that they have of these beings, they look like, and other researchers have pointed it out, they look like the inside of cells, and they look like they're getting information about cells and mitochondrial splitting and all that kind of stuff, which again, there's no use for that information, but presumably a complex entity or collection of entities living near Sirius would be privy to it. So that's the Starship's thesis, is kind of looking for the stuff that is, it's almost like out of place intellectual artifacts that show that something other than humans are involved in this.
Let's pause here, because this is really worth unpacking even more. I think you're hitting on it, but so right, why would let's say, actual astronauts from elsewhere come speak to the Dogon, give them all of this information, which, as you just said, is pointless. I mean, there's no need for the Dogon to have this type of level of detail. But when you talk about redundancies, so this is redundant information for them. But as you point out at various places in your research, in your book, redundancies are precisely what people will get through psi phenomena, through psychically.
Absolutely, and in particular channeling. So if you try to remote view or channel, you will get a whole bunch of information, maybe 40% of which is what you're after, and the rest of it, a lot of it will eventually bear out. It's like, well, I saw this kid with a purple balloon and he was doing this thing by a park and it makes no sense, and then like it subsequently does. You know, these things get weird and mysterious. So for me, and this is where the magical background I think helps when analyzing this information, I look at this stuff and I see, I mean, this is a simplistic description, but useful enough. Like I look and I see a channeling session. Like I see accurate and useful information and accurate and not useful information, and that's channeling or remote viewing to me.
Yeah, I have to say, I've never, maybe I just haven't gotten out enough, but I have not encountered this thesis before. And,
I don't think I have either.
Yeah, so is this your, I mean, I just want to ask you, is this your original thesis as far as you can tell? Has anyone else?
As far as I can tell, yes. I'm happy to be corrected on that because I would love to talk to someone who's also doing it. But
it's very interesting. And honestly, I mean, I don't know how one can prove or disprove this, but at least initially. But I will just say it has more logic to it than a lot of the other explanations that we hear about, you know, in terms of ancient contact with other types of beings and so forth. So I found it very interesting.
It has the benefit of parsimony because we don't have to make that great cosmic leap because we know that humans can do these things. So it may be wrong. You know what? Some beings may have actually come from Sirius to talk to the Dogon, but we don't need that to open the door to having these discussions and research about what humans are and what else might be out there, and how we have a relationship with the wider universe and where we get our ideas and complexity and technology from. Like, we actually don't need the spaceships to have an ancient aliens discussion.
Well, you realize this opens up an entire whole world of objections that so many people will be having and do have with this type of thesis, which is that, oh, here we go, more woo, more consciousness, more unprovable claims about having telepathic connection with, other beings and so on. And I simply think of my own journey in this field, which has now been about 25 years, and where I've gone in terms of where I was at when I started and what I look at now. It's very easy for me to understand and sympathize with the standard classical materialist conception of wanting clear-cut answers that can be weighed and measured and written down accurately into a book and said, here, this is the truth. But in reality, I think things are not going to be so simple and could very well be much more complex. And I think you're kind of moving into that territory.
Yeah.